For those of you listening who are professional brewers, I'm here to tell you that planning brew schedules just got easier. Starting now, Imperial Yeast guarantees that commercial orders up to 20 liters of 3 of their most popular strains will ship free if they're not in stock when you place your order. So in addition to pitching right with the highest quality yeast on the market, they're promising that yeast will be ready when you need it or shipping is on them. A rad deal from a rad company. Whether you're a pro or a home brewer, if you haven't tried Imperial Yeast in your brewery yet, it's time to up your game. You can check out everything Imperial Yeast has to offer and place your commercial orders at imperialyeast.com. From a traditional perspective, beer requires 4 ingredients: water, malt, yeast, and of course, hops, the latter of which receives the most attention, due, I think at least, to the current popularity of IPA. Now, as a primary contributor to beer aromatics, it likely comes as no surprise that hops are actually flowers from the Humulus lupulus plant. And while it's becoming more and more common for brewers to use wet hops fresh off the vine in their beer, the large majority of hops get processed into either whole cone or pellet hops. But these days, there are more options available. You're listening to the Brewlosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Marshall Schott, and joining me today is contributor Brian Hall to chat a little bit about a new hop product that hit the market a couple years ago with the promise to deliver a pungent punch of hop character.
Cryo Hops. You may have seen them marketed as Lupulin N2, and they are a lupulin powder that has been separated from the vegetative matter of the whole hop cone. So there's this special super secret cryogenic process, hence the name Cryo Hops. And the idea here is you get a stronger punch of aroma and flavor to your beer without all of that vegetative cone material.
Yeah, soon after they released or announced, I guess, Cryo Hops, and people started experimenting with it in their own brewing, based on the marketing, it really did seem like it would provide something a little bit more than the hops that we're all used to using, which typically come in pellet or whole cone form. I've never used Cryo Hops, but I was curious to see how they would compare in the experiment that you did. Now, speaking of hops, I'm currently drinking a Hop Solo IPA from Sierra Nevada Brewing Company. I feel like I have to comment on this because this is the first time I've had this beer. It's from their new single hop series. I think they're going to make it a series. And the feature hop in this is none other than Crystal. Have you ever used Crystal, Brian? It's not a terribly exciting hop variety out there right now.
I've never used Crystal before.
Either have I. And holy shit, is this beer good?
Makes me want to.
Dude, I mean, Sierra Nevada chose it for a reason, I have to believe, and it blew my mind. I was excited to try it just because it's not common that I can say I haven't used an ingredient, and especially one that's as old as Crystal Hops, but I've never used Crystal Hops. And my goodness, I will be picking some up very soon to play with. It's I don't mean to turn this into a beer review, but my goodness, I get like this almost danky, fruity thing going on. Really classic hop character that I'm absolutely loving. I'm excited to put this one through the Hop Chronicles. And little secret for those out there who might want to try their hand at playing with some Crystal: 1 pound bags of 2017 crop Crystal is only $7.99 at Yakima Valley Hops.
Holy cow.
Right, yeah. So don't say I never did anything good for you. All right, listen, I'm going to be in Asheville, North Carolina with Drew Beecham and Denny Kahn March 22nd and 23rd for the BYO Boot Camp, and I would absolutely love to see you there. If you're thinking about heading out, make sure to register before February 22nd to save $100 off of the registration fee. All you have to do is head over to byobootcamp.com and use code BYOBootcampBrewlosophy when checking out. In addition to our seminar on experimentation and brewing, you get to choose another seminar that's facilitated by somebody way cooler than me, John Palmer, Michael Tonsmeyer, Gordon Strong, many others. Register now. It's going to be a rad time. If you notice my voice sounds a little different, I've been dealing with this cold for the last 4 days. Hopefully this beer is going to help me out. It's the first one I've had in probably 2 or 3 days. So a huge cheers to all of our patrons out there. If it weren't for your support, we honestly would not be here. And I hope you feel it's been worth it. Coming up on February 16th, the alchemist John Kimmich, credited by many as sort of inventing the hazy New England IPA thing. He's going to be taking patron questions in our private Facebook group, and we've got some other rad folks lined up as well. This reward is only available to those who make a $3 monthly pledge, and we've got other levels that'll get you unique discounts to YakimaValleyHops.com, private Brewlosophy recipes, and more. Learn about becoming a patron at patreon.com/Brulosophy. And for those who don't feel up to pledging a monthly contribution, please consider using the links found at brulosophy.com/support when you shop online, a painless way to help us out that we really appreciate. All right, feedback is brought to you by Brewers Hardware, who want to make sure that you're ready for springtime brewing. So they're offering 15% off all wort strainers and CIP spray balls during the entire month of February. All you have to do is head over to brewershardware.com, place the product that suits you best in your cart, then use the code February to receive the discount. That's FEBREWARY, February. And make sure to mention you heard about this on the Brulosophy podcast to receive an extra gift. Again, that's brewershardware.com. All right, Jordan Folks from Portland, Oregon had some feedback on our recent enzyme episode. This was one of many pieces of feedback that we got on that show. He said, I don't think you mentioned diacetyl concerns with the enzymes used for Brut IPA in the recent episode. A couple recent articles on Brut IPA both mentioned diacetyl concerns. If my memory serves me, Kim Sturdivant of Social Kitchen and Brewery, that's out of San Francisco, and Jordan says he thinks they're the ones who invented the style. He explains in a BYO article that he prefers to use the enzymes in the mash as to prevent diacetyl production that can occur if it's added directly to the fermenter. Mitch Steele also cautions against adding it directly into the fermenter prior to fermentation, and Jordan believes he also cautions against adding it after fermentation is complete, as this can lead to a buttery mess. Instead, Mitch recommends adding it at the tail end of fermentation around 1022 specific gravity. Living in Portland, Oregon, and traveling a ton for work, Jordan says he's been lucky enough to try quite a few examples of the style. And let me tell you, many have been disgusting butter bombs, he says. But when the style is done right, like one of your Northwest favorites, Freem, lordy, is it delicious. Freem is hands down one of my favorite Northwest breweries, mostly for their lagers. I guess they're making a Brut IPA that's pretty good. But Brian, I've not heard of this diacetyl thing. Is that something that you have any experience with, or?
It's nothing I've heard of. It's nothing I've experienced. I'm curious more about it. I'm going to look it up actually a little later today after we get done here recording, because this is news to me. Yeah. I got nothing on that one.
No, either do I. Yeah. But if, Kim and Mitch are, both really high class brewers, if they're saying that there's an issue with it, I guess I'd tend to take their word for it until I tried it out for myself. I've still not played with enzymes in my own brewing, but this is something for those of you out there who are trying to make Brut IPA. Keep this in mind. That's probably some pretty good advice. So thanks so much, Jordan, for the feedback. If you have show feedback, you can send it to feedback@brulosophy.com. Leave us a voice message by calling 951-444-0320, or risk saying something on social media. We might actually bring it up here on the show. All right, kettle souring has become a popular way to make tart beers, and it's a method that's allowed for experimentation beyond the typical sour styles. Listener Mark Keenan recently sent me a 6.3% ABV dry hopped kettle sour that I was really interested to try out for myself.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
I think he thinks we're going to like it.
Yeah, well, it looks like a normal beer. Oh, I didn't like that smell reaction.
No.
I take a big tug, bud.
All right, here we go.
That was a big tug.
Well, it's different than I thought it was going to taste.
Well, how did you think it was going to taste?
I thought it was going to be a real strong IPA.
Why? Because you know nothing.
Just because that smell.
I do smell some pine.
Yeah.
All right, let's give it a taste.
And it has like a slight sour taste to it.
Citrusy, a little bit sour. Citrusy, a little bit sour. Oh, I like it a lot. We've had this before.
I have not. It has a weird end taste going on.
End taste. I mean, it's just a tiny bit sour, but it's like a normal. I don't know what I'm talking about.
Not bad.
You've had this a million times before, and every time you said you liked it. Now you don't like it.
How would I have had it a million times?
You know what, dude?
I don't know.
I don't know either.
It has a weird, at the end for me, a weird taste.
We're like the blind leading the blind, dude. I don't know. What do you want me to say? It's beer.
It's not bad. I've had worse.
I know, dude. I know what's in there that I have not placed yet.
What?
Dish soap. Take another taste. Tell me you don't taste dish soap.
A little bit.
Like maybe you left a little bit of dish soap in the glass and then you poured the beer.
Yeah. Kind of a berry
dish soap. Berry dish soap. That's what I'm going with, dude. I give this a 9 Jersey.
I gave it a 3.
This is one of the best berry dish soaps I've ever had.
Cheers.
I promise I did not leave berry dish soap in their glasses before pouring the beer. I don't even use berry dish soap. But to me, the beer didn't taste like dish soap at all. It was actually really tasty. I perceived a flavor of like dried apricots with a little bit of yogurt. I'm assuming that came from the lactobacillus, with a ruby red grapefruit nose. It had a very, very strong aroma, to me at least, of like ruby red grapefruit juice. Very, very pleasant. Mark did send a little write-up that I wanted to share some of the stuff that he put in there. He said he's been making a lot of kettle sour beers, has his process down to a routine, and that it's nowhere near as intimidating as he initially thought. I think that's awesome. For any of you out there who enjoy sour beers but have been kind of afraid to try it out for yourself, consider giving kettle souring a shot. We'll do a show on that soon, I'm sure. He said that Mark went on to say that the grain bill for this beer was adapted from Rare Barrel's Golden Base, a delicious beer, domestic two-row, wheat malt, aromatic malt, and flaked oats. After a brief boil, he chilled the wort, pitched Good Belly, that's a probiotic, like yogurt type drink, and then left it at 95 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 35 degrees C, for 3 days, at which point it dropped to 3.2 pH. He then boiled for 20 minutes, chilled, then pitched a pouch of Imperial Yeast GO2 Kaiser, that's their alt beer strain, and after 2 weeks of fermentation, he dry hopped with Amarillo, Hallertau Blanc, and Huell Melon, leaving it alone for a week before kegging and carbonating. The beer was about 2 months old at the time we reviewed it again. I thought it was delightful. In fact, he sent 2 bottles, the second of which I enjoyed by myself a couple days after we did the review. Brian, what do you think of Mark's process?
It sounds pretty solid to me. The thing that strikes with me is when the guys mentioned the dish soap. I've had some kettle sours before that have been dry hopped, and the thought that comes to my head is this kind of tastes like dirty dishwater. So I do wonder if there is, I'm not saying this was in his beer necessarily, but the fact that it was mentioned, gets my mind whirling as to whether there's something in somebody's process or whether it's a dry hop kettle sour interaction. I don't know. They're definitely delicate beers, and you really have to nail it to make it something that's awesome. In my experience, I haven't had one that I've made come out wonderful. I have had some good ones, and some made by Michael Tonsmeyer that were delicious, actually.
Yeah, I've had some of Michael's as well, and they're good. I got to be honest, the one that Mark submitted was really good. I think there's a unique thing that comes from dry hopping, sour beers, that I guess I can sort of understand maybe coming across as being, it seems to me that the acid sort of amplifies the hop oils, and he used some interesting hops. Hallertau Blanc, my understanding is that has kind of a tangerine type of thing. Huell Melon, these kind of more pungent German style hops along with Amarillo. I guess it sort of makes sense that the guys might perceive it as being a little bit, soapy, though I think they were picking up more on the pungency of that berry or fruity thing. Whatever it was, I enjoyed it. It sounded to me, and my memory, if my memory serves me, that Jersey really enjoyed it. It wasn't Tim's gig, but you can't win them all. So Mark, thank you so much for sending your beer in. If you want your beer or any other fermented beverage reviewed by Jersey and Tim on the show, you can email me, marshall@brewlosophy.com, and we'll get you all set up. Okie doke. We'll be back in just a bit. Family-owned Atlantic Brew Supply is the largest homebrew shop in the Southeast. No gimmicks, no multinational corporate overlords, and no BS. They offer exclusive malts, yeast, and more from local artisans, as well as award-winning recipe kits. They also sell professional brewing gear and cask equipment from sister companies ABS Commercial and Cask Supply. Most ingredients are available by the ounce, plus Atlantic Brew Supply has an on-site calculator to help you craft your best brew. Orders are processed same day, and 2-day shipping is guaranteed for East Coast customers. Get 15% off your first order using promo code BREWPOD, that's BRUPOD, at AtlanticBrewSupply.com. As every brewer knows, the best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world, carrying everything from classics like Cascade to modern favorites like Galaxy and Mosaic, as well as other ingredients and gear. Yakima Valley Hops has it all. And don't forget to check out their new podcast, The Late Edition, where the YVH crew goes into depth on our favorite plant with industry experts. Head over to YakimaValleyHops.com now to see all they have to offer, and subscribe to The Late Edition wherever it is you listen to podcasts. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste more time chilling wort. I've tried so many different options, and ultimately I settled on the super efficient immersion chillers made by Jaded Brewing. With the King Cobra and Hydra, I'm able to chill my entire batch of wort from boiling to just a few degrees above groundwater temperature in as little as 6 minutes. If an immersion chiller is right for your brewery, then do yourself a favor and check out all of the rad options Jaded Brewing has to offer at jadedbrewing.com. And be sure to let them know Brewlosophy sent you.
Hi, I'm Stephen Leach, creator of Brow Supply Brewing Systems, here to tell you about our latest Unibrow brewing system. Modeled after the brew-in-a-bag method, the Unibrow uses the same kettle for both mashing and boiling, replacing the fabric bag with a stainless basket that can hold up to 20 pounds of grain. A heating element is run by an electric controller that allows for the maintenance of specific mash temperatures and makes mashing easier than ever. Each Unibrow is shipped with a counterflow chiller and the parts required to brew a batch of beer. We're really proud of the Unibrow, and we know you'll love it as much as we do. Go check it out at browsupply.com and sign up for our email list to receive special deals in your inbox.
Whether you're a hop head or not, there's no denying the reality that hops are an integral aspect of beer, from blonde ale to barley wine. Now, for the most part, hops are processed immediately after being picked from the field, some remaining as whole cones after being dried out, while a good chunk go on to be pelletized. Brian, you and I have had the fortune to hang out in Yakima during hop harvest a couple of times now. It really is a sight to see.
It's pretty amazing. We've seen pretty much everything except the planting and the growing. I mean, we've seen everything from the harvest side. We've seen them cutting the bines. We've seen them, stripping them off. We've seen the separation. It's a really, really cool, very mechanical process that happens. And so, you end up with multiple products. You mentioned the pellets. We talked about the whole leaf, and there's a couple other products that are put out, and that is the hop hash, which is essentially, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there is a giant wheel, and I wish we had a picture of it because it's a pretty impressive looking piece of equipment, and it's about half as tall as you are, and they
hey, listen, dude.
I didn't say anything. I said half as tall as you are. Giant wheel. Hops get mashed up, and they're pressed into it. It looks like kind of like one of those noodle machines you see on those Discovery Channel shows where the noodles are just smashed through and there's a rotating thing that just clips them off.
Yeah, it's a die. It's a huge die that's probably about 4.5, 5 foot in diameter, right? And it has these tiny little holes, and that hop goes in there and it gets squished out and it creates hop pellets. I believe that's what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Anyway, but then there's this buildup of material on this die or inside of this drum, and essentially, I think what they do is they just scrape it out because it's just this smearing oily goop, and it's supposedly much more potent than just normal pellet hops, but it is, if I'm not mistaken, it is the exact same product.
It is literally a downstream byproduct of the hop pelletizing process, is my understanding. And yeah. I've not used hop hash, but if you look at the stuff, it looks golden. I mean, it looks like it would just be fantastic to use in beer.
I've used it several times. It comes out just like resinousy, sappy goop almost. That's attached to like the pellets, or it's not even really pellets. It's more of a hash, and it's like pellets on steroids.
Now, I've not seen hop hash available anywhere but YakimaValleyHops.com, and there was. I might be making this up, and I could have checked this beforehand, but I didn't, and I'm sick. So throw me a bone. I believe they might have a kind of a special deal with some of the folks in Yakima for getting that stuff and selling it as hash.
I don't know. Maybe they just walk across the street over to Hollingberry and just scrape it all off and
something like that.
It's good stuff.
It's a cool product. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then the other product, the one that we're focusing on today is Cryo Hops. And, they're, as we mentioned earlier, they are marketed as something that allows brewers to impart super intense levels of hop flavor and aroma without all of the vegetal flavors, which purportedly leads to less vegetal flavors. They also talk about increasing yield, and what they do is they separate. It's some proprietary process, so they're not telling you exactly what's going on, but they separate the whole hop cones into concentrated lupulin and bract at extremely low temperatures, and they do this without crushing the hop.
Yeah.
I've heard rumors that it's crushed and sifted, but somehow they've got it figured out where they don't crush it.
I found something online when I was doing some research about how this stuff is made. Now, disclaimer, I've never used cryo hops either. I'm old school, man. I got a whole freezer full of pellet hops that's what I've been sticking with for the most part. But I found something online. Somebody had mentioned that they were like hanging out with YCH or something and saw this process in action. What they basically do is like flash freeze whole hop cones, and then they tumble them, and that basically like breaks off all of the leafy parts of it that don't have really any of the stuff that apparently we don't want in our beer, and you're left with, in essence, the lupulin glands, and that is primarily what you're getting in when you're buying cryo hops is the more pungent stuff that contains all of the resins that are flavorful, the alpha acids, the beta acids, stuff like that.
Exactly. So yeah, that's interesting to hear. That would make sense, like some sort of giant cryogenic dryer.
Yeah, something. That's what it sounded like. What I was reading, it could be way off, but they're not going to tell us how it's made. I mean,
no. Anyhow, so the benefits from this are supposedly less vegetal flavors, less polyphenols. And then obviously the thing that's really awesome for large scale breweries is a higher yield. So Yakima or YCH recommends, when I spoke with YCH a couple years ago, they said that they recommended using the hop or the lupulin N2 at about 50% the rate that you would with a traditional pellet or whole leaf cone.
And that's purely just because of the fact that, it really is more of a concentrated hop product.
It is. And those alpha acids are concentrated too. They come in at about 23% alpha acid.
Right. And right now, as far as I know, the cryo hops are only available in a certain few varieties, right? It's like Mosaic, Citra. It's not like you can buy cryo hops in Nugget or something like that.
No, not anything. I think they've got 7 or 8 at this point. When it started out, it was mainly your big cheater hops, Citra, Mosaic, Simcoe, but they've expanded out. I think I saw Palisade, not Enigma. I think Eureka is another one that they're doing. So a lot of the ones that are geared more towards these big, juicy, IPA style beers.
The ones that are going to make it worth the cost of them making this product, I imagine, is what the ones they're choosing. Right. The big popular hops right now. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, and on the homebrew level, the cost comes in a little more than double what you might pay for a pellet, and then they're also recommending that you use half as much. So you might, assuming that you're using the recommended 50% dose of what you would normally dry hop, your cost is coming in about the same, but you're ending up with a little bit more beer.
Okay.
On the homebrew level, that might be like half a gallon or something, or a couple pints or a quart.
Yeah.
But on a larger scale, if you're running a 10-barrel system, that could be an extra whole barrel of beer, which turns into another 150 12-ounce beers or something like that.
Right. Yeah, it's a lot of money. And just going back a little bit in terms of how this gets processed, you mentioned a little bit about how hops get pulled off the vine. They go into basically this huge flat, slowly rotating dryer thing. They get dried out. You got this warm air that's kind of being pumped up gently through the bottom of this thick, 1 foot deep thing of hops. And by the time they get to the end of this humongous treadmill, basically, those hops are dried and they're ready for use. In terms of they're basically whole cone hops. They'll go on and they'll get packaged. And a lot of times, if you're ordering whole cone hops and using those in your brewing, you'll see that they're kind of flat. That's just usually from the packaging process. They're sucking the air out to preserve those hops a bit, extend their shelf life. For pellet hops, those dried hops, so it just goes further down, down from there. Those dried hops then get baled up, and then they'll get taken over to a pelletizer. They get basically ground down to a powder. That powder goes into this die wheel that Brian was talking about earlier, and then they get shoved out into these pellets. Now hop hash is the stuff that's left over. I just want to distinguish, hop hash and cryo hops are not the same thing. The process of making cryo hops is proprietary to YCH. It's a big secret, and purportedly produces a product of, I don't know if I would call it higher quality, but of different quality than pellets, whole cone, and hop hash.
Yeah, supposedly it's a more intense pleasurable hop experience, I guess would be the way that you might market it. It's supposed to be the best of the hop without all of the those vegetal grassy flavors, astringencies, we mentioned the polyphenols, those sorts of things. So it's supposed to be like the pure part of the hop, just the part you want.
Yeah. Well, and you mentioned polyphenols. Another thing that I've read is that by using cryo hops, because they have a very large degree less amount of leaf material, of just plant material, that you are less likely, particularly in these beers that you're throwing 450,000 pounds of hops at, that you're less likely to have grassy or plant, vegetal flavors, just because of that lack of of leafy material and chlorophyll and all the stuff that comes along with that. You really are, again, according to the marketing, according to YCH, you're imparting this beer, you're adding to this beer the concentrated good stuff.
Right. That's what they do. And then, interestingly enough, they also have a product called American Noble, which is all of that other stuff that they market as a very low alpha acid, but still retains some of the good properties of hop flavor. So I'm not as knowledgeable when it comes to the American Noble. I know Jake's messed around with that stuff a little bit.
Yeah.
We tried a couple of the demo beers that they had, and they didn't make me want to go out and buy American Noble. I've got some in the freezer, but it's nothing I've played around with yet. It's just since, the marketing for Cryo was so strong, saying that this is all the best of the best. And then they've got this American Noble, and it's like, all right, so what is this?
Yeah. It's funny because I'm thinking about this hop hash thing, which again, I've never used it. I don't have an opinion on this stuff, but that's like, hey, we got this stuff left over that we're usually throwing out. Let's package it up and sell it. And people seem to like it. American Noble sounds to me kind of like the hop hash of the cryo process, as opposed to the pelletizing process. Now one thing I keep referring to, pellets versus cryo hops. My understanding, and this comes from comments after you published your article on this, the experiment article, is that cryo hops actually do come in both powder and pelletized form.
Interesting you bring that up. So when Cryo Hops first came out, they did come out as just a powder. And I actually got to go down and help out one of the local breweries when they were making one of their New England IPAs. And it's just a 5 pound brick of this powder. And so it's kind of fun. We smeared it on our faces and made little, but it is just a powder. And the problem that the problem that professional brewers were having with this is getting it into their beer. They don't have the ability to swirl the carboy. And, they got this product about a year and a half before we did, before homebrewers did, I should say. And so they were messing around with it, and they would dump it in, and it would just sit there. It wouldn't actually go into the beer. It
just kind of float on the top of it.
Just float on the top. So they did things of having to recirculate their beer. They did bubbling CO2 is a very popular option with some breweries. And so there was a lot of, I don't know if complaining is the right word, but a lot of feedback to YCH. And so YCH came up with a pelletized version of cryo hops. And all it is that powder just smashed into a pellet so that it will actually sink down into the beer and become more homogeneous. So they're actually the exact same product. One of them has just been pelletized for easier use.
It's okay. So that's interesting to me. So these are called cryo hops. For anybody out there who doesn't know, cryo alludes to the fact that the hops are frozen, the freezing cold. And my understanding was that in addition to making it easier to get rid of that leafy material, that freezing it preserved the oils that we want to put into our beers. It doesn't isomerize any of the alpha acids, nothing like that. When you're pelletizing a hop and it's going through these dyes, as it gets pushed, it gets really warm. Mm-hmm. Those hops naturally are going to heat up. They get pretty hot. It makes me wonder, there's no way you're going to be able to avoid that, but I wonder to what extent pelletizing these cryo hops kind of negates any of the benefit, besides, of course, again, getting rid of the leafy material, any of the benefit of doing the processing cold.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm guessing it's proprietary, their pelletizing process, but maybe it's something that they're also doing super cold. Probably not at cryogenic levels, but They don't look like normal pellets. They do look different.
Okay.
Than like a T90 pellet or something like that. That looks like a plug. Yeah. Or something like chicken feed or whatever. But the pelletized Cryo Hops, they have more. They don't look like they've been pushed through a die, in my experience. But I also was struggling to say the word die about 10 minutes ago, so don't trust me for anything. So yeah, so we've got all these different things. We've got kind of, if you think of it as a tree, we've got whole leaf, pellet, and then the byproduct of making the pellet is the hop hash, and then completely separate is the Cryo Hop, and then the Cryo Hop started out as a powder form and is now being used as pellets just so that it can go into solution better.
Yeah. And for homebrewers, getting it into solution isn't nearly as difficult because all we have to do is pick up our, kind of just gently swirl our fermenter and we're good to go. It'll usually drop down in there, but I can imagine it making it a bit easier. We've kind of discussed numerous purported benefits to using cryo hops. The higher pungency means you get to not only use less, but you're also adding less leafy material to your beer, which I think you already mentioned, but just to hit on it again, means increased yield at the end. And for homebrewers, this could mean a couple of pints, I believe, at max for like if you're making a New England IPA or something like that. But the idea behind that is that it doesn't have all of that leafy stuff that usually would absorb the beer. So you're still getting all of the effect,
Right.
Presumably.
Two other pros, because I have a sense you're going into the cons maybe in a second here. Two other pros, one of which is that the pellets do break down very easily and a lot faster, I've noticed, than than traditional T90 or whatever T size pellets you have, and they do get into they mix into the beer a lot faster. I've heard of breweries saying that they get a pretty good extraction within a couple hours, instead of multiple days. I don't know how factual that is as far as like a lab measurement, but you've got these small particles in there a lot quicker, so there's that, and then there's also a clarity aspect, and for someone that does a lot of New England IPAs, I'm always interested in haze and what causes haze.
What you could do to keep haze around, basically.
So we've talked about this. I don't mind a hazy beer. I don't like a turbid beer. I don't like a murky beer. So my interest is not. I don't really actually even care about the haze. It's more of like I don't mind that it's there, not that I'm searching for it.
Sure. Yeah.
And so. One of the theories behind haze production, we've talked about this on previous episodes, is interaction between polyphenols and proteins that are in the wort, and people are doing a lot of things with biotransformation, and so they're adding their hops earlier on when the wort has a higher, or the fermenting beer has a higher protein content, because protein content tends to taper as fermentation goes on, and polyphenols bind with proteins, causing a permanent haze.
Right.
So if you're using a biotransformation and you're using a cryo product, if you got less polyphenols, you've got less binding with these proteins, and so you end up with a less hazy beer. And most of the brewers that I've talked to that are doing cryo beers have talked about how they've had to do something to increase their haze level. And beers that I've brewed where I've used a large amount of cryo versus other beers where I've used T90, the cryo beers do tend to come out a bit lighter in color and a little bit clearer. I should say a little bit clearer than the other ones. And I think part of that is due to that interaction. So
that's typically been the case, because I know you've used cryo hops numerous times, more than just in the experiment, which we'll get to in a bit. That's typically been your experience, is that you're seeing levels of clarity that maybe you wouldn't expect if you were using pellet or whole cone hops.
Correct. Oh. That's just been my observations as I've made the beer. And I think actually Scott Janish did something. He did an experiment of a cryo versus a T90. The one that he dry hopped with the cryo is much, much, much clearer in color than the one that he dry hopped with traditional pellets.
Yeah, that's interesting. Well, when it comes to downsides, as you predicted, we got to talk about. I think the two biggest things, honestly, are that currently the Cryo Hops process is proprietary to YCH Hops, so the only place you can get it from is them, or not from them, but buy it, from places that purchased it from them. And then the other issue that you see people complaining about is just the cost of it.
Well, the biggest issue in my mind is something that we call the cryo tickle, and it's not the good kind of tickle. When you, if you've ever tried a cryo beer, very early on, you may or may not have noticed there is like this tickling sensation in the back of your throat, upper esophagus area, that is just the strangest sensation. It's kind of like if you've ever drank a little bit of beer while you're brewing along, or whether you're tasting and you've got some hot particulate in solution. It has that sort of tickle to it. And it seems to take about, in my experience, once you're done dry hopping, you transfer to the keg, it takes at least a week, if not longer, for this tickling sensation to go away.
That is really interesting. And it makes me wonder, so you and I were actually, I think it was you who I was talking with about this last time we were hanging in Yakima, and we were sampling a Cryo Hop beer, and you picked it up. If I'm not mistaken, it was either you or Malcolm picked it up, and I could not understand what it was you were talking about, which again just proves how shitty of a taster I am. But it's interesting if it's something that you detect when you're tasting, wort on brew day, and that obviously has a lot of hop particulate in solution, makes me wonder if it just doesn't take longer for cryo hops to fall out of solution, and that's all you're picking up, that it's not necessarily contributed by cryo hops. It's just the fact that you've got this more pungent, less leafy version of hops that are taking longer to fall out of solution, and maybe people are perceiving that.
Right. I think you've got, essentially you're making a powder and you're putting a powder into the beer. And so since you don't have these heavier, leafier chunks, gravity is not doing its job essentially. Well, yeah. I shouldn't say it like that. It's taking longer for them to drop out essentially.
Yeah. It makes sense to me.
Yeah. So I've had it last week and a half, 2 weeks, and some beers where I've used a lot of cryo hops. I've talked to breweries that have used them. I've tasted beers from breweries that I know they're using tons of cryo hops. That are pushing out their beers on the faster side, I guess we should say, would be the polite term. And it's this tickle, and it's a very unpleasant sensation. I mean, it doesn't make you gag or anything like that, but it makes it not enjoyable.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of tickles in the back of my throat in general. Someone with my own thoughts about this novel product, I was pretty excited about your experiment comparing cryo hops to pellets. Results when we return. When dumping wort-soaked grain and leftover low-gravity wort while cleaning up after a brew day, did you ever wonder what your true efficiency would be if that wort made its way to the kettle instead? Using the brew bag, a fabric filter for all mash tuns and brewing methods, allows you to capture every last drop of wort. Not only does this increase kettle efficiency, it lowers your grain bill, which saves you money. Throwing wort in the trash is like dumping a 12-pack down the drain and just doesn't make sense. Use the brew bag and leave no wort behind. I've been using these filters for a long time and recommend them to everyone. I never have to worry about a stuck sparge, and cleanup is fast and easy. Go grab yourself a brew bag fabric filter at brewinabag.com and be sure to use code TBP17 at checkout to get a discount on your order.
Compact and simple to use with a small footprint for brewing indoors, the Grainfather makes it easy for you to brew professional quality beers at home. The Grainfather is an all-in-one brewing system that lets you brew all grain beer in a single compact stainless steel unit. It uses an electric heating element and pump to maintain a constant temperature and to circulate the wort during the mashing and cooling stages. It also comes with a counterflow chiller to reduce chilling times and produce high-quality wort. And now, with the addition of their conical fermenter, the Grainfather takes things one step further by offering homebrewers state-of-the-art temperature-controlled fermentation just like commercial breweries use. And with the Grainfather Recipe Creator and Connect app, you can easily design a recipe, sync your brewing system with your phone, and then just sit back and relax as the app takes over and assures that you maintain your scheduled mash temps and boil schedule. Head to Grainfather.com to purchase your all-in-one brewing system today and to sign up for their free recipe creator tool. Once more, head on over to Grainfather.com, that's Grainfather.com, and get started today.
So I've been hanging out with brewers and craft beer nerds for a long time now, and while we do occasionally have our differences, one thing it seems we all share is a love of learning and trying new things, as well as saving a couple of bucks. Well, right now, Craft Beer and Brewing is helping fans of Brewlosophy learn more while saving some coin by offering 20% off the price of a subscription to their awesome magazine. Chock full of brewing insights, tips, and recipes from industry experts, Craft Beer and Brewing is seriously great. I read every issue page to page myself. To get 20% off your subscription, all you have to do is sign up at beerandbrewing.com/brewlosophy. Have you ever thought about adding a port to your kettle but held off because you didn't feel like drilling into your gear or sending it off to have someone else do it? From the makers of the super fast counterflow chiller, the Xchillerator, comes the Hangover, the easiest way to add extra ports to your kettle as well as countless other options. Mount a faucet to your keg for easy portable pouring. Set up the perfect whirlpool arm. Hold a heating element in place. All of this and so much more without permanently modifying your gear. Manufactured right here in the United States, the Hangover offers brewers too many convenient solutions to list here. So head over to Xchillerator.com today to see what the Hangover can do for you. I've been buying hops in bulk for at least 6 years, and while I've definitely noticed a slight hit on volume when making super hoppy styles, it's never really been a big issue for me as a home brewer. Now, I've always gotten the character out of pellet hops that I expected, but still, when Cryo Hops hit the market a couple years ago, my interest was certainly piqued.
You know, my interest was flying the second I even heard about them. Something about the term cryogenic just makes my senses tingle. So when I found out that one of our local breweries was using Cryo Hops to make one of the first all cryo beers. I think it was the first.
What brewery? Is this Girdwood?
This is Anchorage Brewing Company.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And he has got some good buddies down in California, Henry from Monkish. And Monkish, Henry came up here and they brewed this beer called Lions, I believe is the name of the first one. And so I went down because I'd never heard of cryo. We couldn't get cryo. And I wanted to see what all the fuss was about. So I went down and tried this beer, and it was a very good beer. It tasted very, very hoppy, but it tasted. The best way I was able to describe it is it tasted almost like a one-dimensional hop note to me. Huh. It was very fruity. It was very pungent. But if you think of beer having body to it, I think of as ingredients having that too, and hop. It didn't have like a hop body to it.
Sure.
And I later found out. I think it was. I'm going to mess it up, but I think it was 3 different varieties that they had used in this beer, but it didn't taste like you had that 3 different varieties. I mean, it was kind of like the purest part of the hop, but you were missing some of those things they describe as having removed that leafiness, that grassiness, the kind of that resiny component. It was missing kind of the roundness to it. It was a very one-dimensional hop flavor. And that being said, it was like a 8% beer, something like that, extremely crushable, very smooth. A New England IPA style, of course.
Yeah.
But it was missing kind of the rest of the hop. It felt like it was missing that roundness to it, that body.
Yeah,
that I enjoy.
This is not the first time that I've heard cryo hop beers described as being kind of unidimensional, despite being blended with other cryo hops. And it's always in situations like that where I just wish I had another version of that beer brewed with, say, pellet hops next to it,
right,
to compare it to.
Well, and it was super fun because it was one of those things where I went into it having heard about cryo hops, but had no idea what to expect. Came out with these ideas about the beer, and then found out, a year later, that's what a lot of people were saying too, which I think is one of the reasons why people recommend using 50% cryo hops and then, another 50-60% T90 or other pellet equivalent just to round out the beer a little bit. So despite all that, as I tried more and more cryo hop beers, I thought, oh, this is interesting. This tastes like this tastes like that. So eventually it was time to test it out. So I went and got some cryo hop, some Citra Cryo, and I'm a huge Citra fanboy. And so I decided to make a hoppy pale ale instead of a New England IPA, just to try and let the cryo hop shine as much as possible. So went with a pretty simple hoppy pale ale, 91% pale malt, 9% Vienna. I do like a little bit of Vienna in with my hoppy beers. I think it just really, especially with those fruitier hops, it really is nice.
Agreed.
Although I'm sure if we tested, I'd probably fail that too. I did all Citra hops at 30 minutes, 15 minutes, 5 minutes, 1 minute, and then a dry hop. And so with the and I'll mention it now and probably again in a minute, but I matched the IBUs for the cryo hops to the pellets. And then for dry hopping, I used 50% of the amount of cryo as I did pellet as per YCH's recommendations.
And now you spoke with YCH or
I did.
Went back and forth, and this was sort of the what we set on based on your conversations with YCH.
Right. So it was recommended when I spoke with YCH, and I told them that I was going to be talking about cryo hops, and I wanted to make sure that the information that I was giving was appropriate. And I said, what are you? And I said, well, we're working with all these breweries, and everybody's coming back with about 50 to 60% recommended dosing for cryo as opposed to what you would normally use for pellets. So this was based on their recommendation. So I realized it wasn't a pound for pound or ounce for ounce, but it was dry hopping what they recommended it should be. So for any comments on that is the why. So, because I know somebody's going to ask. I used Imperial Yeast Flagship. I did a 60-minute mash at 154 degrees at 68 Celsius. Both were boiled for an hour with hops added at the exact same times. Ended up with a original gravity of 1055, pitched, fermented, 66 degrees, 19 Celsius, dry hopped, both of them after a week of fermentation. And once again, the cryo was 50% of the pellet per YCH.
Right.
So both of them ended up with a 1005 FG. So this beer actually dried out fairly well.
So one of the things that's an interesting point to me, because one of the things that I read about, and I don't know how popular this idea is. I know the idea of hop creep in general is kind of gaining steam and getting more and more attention. This idea of hop creep is just that, to put it simply, when you dry hop, you're actually adding sugars from those hops are going to be re-fermented by the yeast or fermented by the yeast that's still in solution in your beer. The fact that both of these finished at 10:05 sort of says to me that either the same amount of hop creep happened, and perhaps that explains the low FG to some degree. I mean, you mash these at 154 degrees Fahrenheit, 68 C. I would have expected it maybe to end at closer to 10:09, 10:10. But, it was a big dry hop charge. If anything, either hop creep didn't happen on both of them, or it happened exactly the same on both of them, which I thought was kind of interesting.
Yeah, so both beers racked into kegs, carbonated, didn't use any gelatin. Immediately, I noticed upon racking that the cryo hop beer was noticeably clearer than the pellet beer.
So that was at kegging, you noticed that there was this difference in clarity already. And for anybody who wants to go, heads to that website and reads this article, it's a pretty clear difference in the finished beers as well. So these beers were, kegged, carbonated exactly the same. And the pictures that you took for the article, it shows that the cryo hop beer, sort of like you predicted based on your past experience and this idea behind polyphenols, binding with haze forming compounds and all this stuff, it really does seem that the cryo hop beer is quite noticeably clearer than the pellet hop beer.
Yeah, it is quite a bit clearer. And for this beer, I actually thought they were both delicious. They they almost pulled a Ray. We'll just put it that way. However, I did serve these to all my friends, buddies, went down to Girdwood Brewing Company, served them to the guys down there because they like to see what's going on with these New England IP, or not New England IPA, but these hoppier things that can be potentially translated into some of their New England IPAs. And I got 21 people to take this test, and we would expect that 12 people would have to answer correctly for this to be significant, and only 5 people were able to pick the odd beer out, indicating that this is not a significant result. So for all intents and purposes, they were a pretty identical beer.
Yeah, so this is an interesting one, because there's been a lot of talk out there about how using cryo hops does lead to this beer that is just missing something in the middle. That's how I've heard it described. That you're getting, it's not lacking in hop character, but there's something about using the full hop, and it could just be a familiarity thing. We've talked about this before, that when I taste a beer, I'm expecting a beer that's been made, for the last hundreds of years, with all of the leafy material, intact. So whatever that contributes, small as it might be, on kind of a granular scale, the overall picture is what I'm expecting. And when you use this product that is just the pungent parts with the quote unquote unnecessary stuff taken out, you potentially, it sounds, what people were saying is that it's stripping this kind of expected perceptible aspect of beer. And what these results are showing is that the cryo hops performed equally as well, at least based on this blind data, as the pellet hops. And it makes me wonder to what extent, we're experiencing things like that hop tickle or whatever, or a thinner beer, just because we know, and I'm not, Brian, I would never accuse you of being biased, of course, but to what extent are we experiencing that because of our knowledge that this beer was made with cryo hops?
Yeah, and for those people that are listening that haven't read the article, they're saying, well, maybe you didn't use enough. I used 4 ounces of 114 grams of pellet Citra and 2 ounces of cryo on the dry hop. So a fairly good charge. It wasn't.
Yeah.
I mean, just for being a hoppy pale ale, it was a pretty good charge.
And that's just the dry hop. I mean, you had everything
just
together.
the dry hop.
Yeah.
So there were 2 or 3 ounces in the boil. There was another ounce at 5 minutes, a half an ounce at 15, half an ounce at 30. This was pretty charged with Citra. Your comments get me thinking, well, I wonder how this would fare if we did, Citra Simcoe Mosaic. Or those sorts of things. Because I feel like the part that seemed missing to me the first time I tried it, and then again, this was not knowing anything about a cryo hop at all. So I don't know how psychologically that works with all the biasy stuff that you talk about all the time, but not knowing what a cryo hop was, going in thinking something was missing.
Yeah.
I can kind of see that.
Well, you said you enjoyed these beers, both of them equally. How did you perform in your own series of triangle tests? We always do, 4 or 5 triangle tests ourselves. Were you able to tell the beers apart?
Oh, I'm pretty sure I wasn't.
Okay.
I'm checking right now. Let's see. I got 1/3 probability on mine,
which is exactly what we'd expect by random guessing. So that just kind of goes to show now, and you be honest here. When you were drinking them side by side, I know honesty is so difficult. When you were drinking them side by side, did you think that they tasted different?
Straight out of the gate, when I was kegging them, I did think that they did taste different. And after, I gave them having experienced this purported tickle several times, I did think that they needed a week to condition. So I did let them condition for a little while before I served them. I remember tasting them. I don't remember whether I tasted the tickle on this one or not, but I do remember that I did wait a week and a half to let them fully condition before I serve them to tasters, because I do think that that cryo tickle is a real thing, and I think that if the beers were served before the cryo had a chance to drop out, that would have affected the result.
I absolutely agree with you on that, I mean, letting a beer sit for a week after it was kegged, that's still sooner than a lot of people are drinking their beers.
Right.
So that might explain the absence of the tickle effect, if you will. But it still doesn't. To me, that still goes to show that the aroma, flavor, and whatever mouthfeel that was imparted by the cryo hops was for all intents and purposes, really similar to that was imparted by the pellet hops. And that's an interesting finding to me, particularly when you consider the fact that you used the recommended rates. And so kudos to YCH for recommending using less of their product. A lot of people asked about using, more to get, a stronger hop pungency in their beer. It seems to me, based on these results, that seems plausible. I don't know. What are you going to keep using cryo hops in your brewing, or?
I found my playing with cryo has been using it as kind of like a little extra boost. Part of it is just because I have some left over, to be honest with you. And so I'll use it in, one of the experiments I did on one of the New England IPA experiments I did 4 months ago, that beer kind of sat for a little bit. It didn't have quite the same hot punch, or I didn't think it did. So I added a couple ounces of cryo and an ounce of pellets into it in a little canister, let that sit for a week, and then the beer was kind of re-energized. So it's kind of an easy way to re-energize a beer is to add some of the cryo into it.
Sure.
But given the cost of having to, or just given its cost, I should say, and the amount of beer that I'm saving versus using with the pellets, and I mean the traditional pellets, I'll probably be sticking with just the pellets.
Yeah. My thing is that I just don't. This isn't one of those products that I'm looking at it going, oh man, I can't wait to try it out. So I'll probably just keep going with pellets myself. I don't make very much, hoppy pale ale or IPA or things like that anyways. I was kind of interested in, and we'll do a whole show on American Noble at some point as well. We've got an experiment on that, but I was interested in that product. To this day, though, I'm still just kind of sticking with the regular old pellets, and I'm happy with my results. So, we got a few comments from some people when this, as always, of course, when this experiment was published. The first one came from Mike Shoup. He says that this is a great example of how terrible people really are at tasting when they go in blind. The participants and yourself, he's speaking about you, Brian, not me, you, were unable to distinguish them blind. Then we have Scott Janish's results, in which he claims to have been able to distinguish them. He did lupulin powder versus pellets experiment. That's the Cryo Hops. I find this fascinating. My thought is this: perhaps it is a great example of something, but in my mind, it's a great example of how bias can influence one's perceptions when they're tasting beers they brewed themselves and know what's different between them. If you go and you read Scott's article, which is a fantastic article, as is everything on his site, Scott's a good friend of ours, he was comparing these beers next to each other. He brewed them both. He knew what they are. I don't think he would deny that there was an element of bias that could have played a role there. Maybe they were different. Like you mentioned earlier about this article, Brian, Scott openly admitted to making a mistake on this experiment and dry hopping the batch that received pellets in the whirlpool with cryo, and vice versa. So I'm not entirely convinced that Scott's experience nullifies the results of this experiment. But again, as we said, as we have said a bazillion times at this point, this was one experiment on one style of beer, with one set of tasters. Repeat it for yourself. See what you think. I think that's probably the best approach. Yeah,
I agree. I'm not trying to sound too snarky, but it's like, of course, I'm not going to be as good when I'm going into something blind.
Yeah.
If I know what's going on and I've got two beers in front of me, it's fairly easy for me to think about it and be like, oh yeah, this one's this one, this one's that one.
Right.
It's blind is so much harder, and it is the best way to identify if you're trying to sort something out. If it's not blind, what's the point of testing?
Yeah. Just live with your opinions and roll with it. We've done that for hundreds of years in brewing. It's all good.
But obviously Scott Janish is much smarter than I am too. So
you and me both combined. Yeah.
Yeah. So he wins.
Yeah, he wins anyways, right? Yeah, kudos.
But thank
Scott.
you for the comment, Mike. We do appreciate it. I'm not trying to jab you too hard, but I do think that if you do try taste anything, find some wines in your cellar, find some beers, some food, play around with anything. Yeah, you will find that it is much more difficult to do something blind, but you'll also find that you will be surprised with the results. I love to do blind experiments on my wife, my friends. They all hate it because it is much harder, and they realize that a lot of things they don't necessarily think they do, and vice versa. So.
Yeah, I think more than anything, messing around with stuff like this kind of conditions us to be okay with being wrong about things. But that's for another show. We've got another comment by Jack. He says that I found they are best, by they, he's referring to Cryo Hops. They're best used as a keg hop. I stopped keg hopping my New England IPAs because of vegetal flavors, but these don't leave that flavor and bring back that pop you get from keg hopping. I'll probably never make one again without them. By the way, the pellet version is better than the powder. There you go. They're easier to work with and have better flavor in my experience.
Yeah, so I did use the powder because they hadn't come up with the pellet yet when I acquired this cryo. I could see what Jack's saying. So if you've got my contact time with these beers was 5 or 6 days of dry hop. If you're going to throw a canister of hops into a keg and just let it sit till the keg kicks, for the average drinker, that could be a couple weeks.
Sure.
So, maybe there is something that there's something there to having just the lupulin sitting around versus having, all this vegetal matter sitting in your beer for a longer time too.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense to me. I've heard from people before who keg hop, who say that they've left, 2-3 ounces of hops in their keg for, a month and don't get grassy or vegetal flavors. I've never keg hopped before, so I can't speak to that either. Again, most of my beers are very minimally hopped. So, but well, thanks for the comment, Jack. Another comment from Reddit user De Michel, I think. Yeah. Says, did you guys have to stir the cryo hops into the fermenting wort, or did it eventually integrate on its own? I think I remember reading Scott Janish really having to stir it in there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. We mentioned that earlier, before it was a pellet, you really kind of had to swirl it to get it to go in there. Otherwise it just sat on the top.
Yeah. I mean, it's a fine powder. It's going to break the surface tension of the top of the beer. So, all right, Chris Baum, one of our good friends from Yakima's Varietal Brewing Company. If you're ever in the area, they're actually in Sunnyside, Washington. Head over to Varietal. They're killing it with the beers they're making. Chris said, good experiment. One variable that wasn't accounted for is a lot/batch. The pellets you used were almost certainly from a different lot and blend than the cryo dust was made from. Citra quality varies greatly. Not that it matters. In the real world, this point is moot if you're not selecting your hops at the processing facility. And just a note, Chris, again, is from Yakima and participates in hop harvest and basically lives and breathes hops. So I get what he's saying.
Yeah, no, I understand it too. We did the best we could. I think that they were from the same year, but yeah, different lot, different blend. We're just showing that you can just use any hops here, and your beer is going to come out fine.
Absolutely, and they were they were almost certainly, if I recall correctly, from the same year. You and I had kind of gone back and forth on that.
Yeah.
In my opinion, the fact that even though they may have been or most likely were from different, fields or different farmers or whatever, the fact that the experiment results came back non-significant kind of seems to suggest, like you said, that you can get away with using hops from a different lot and still achieving a similar outcome. All right, final comment comes from Christopher John. He left this on Facebook. He says, I'd like to see a variant of this experiment where both versions receive the same bittering charge, then are subjected to equal weights of whirlpool and or dry hops. Standard versus cryo, identical weights, not IBUs like you did, Brian. This will likely drive home just how much more pungent cryo hops are. And in my experience, they sure as hell are, is what he says.
Well, I think this surely as hell shows you that they're more pungent because I used half as many. And people said the beers came back the same. So, yeah, I agree with you, Christopher John. I think that changing the IBUs might be interesting, but that'd be more of an experiment as to whether people can taste two different beers at different IBU levels. We tried to make it so that the beers were as similar as they could possibly be. So yeah, I mean, that is one of the other bonuses of cryo that brewers have mentioned is they can throw more in and get more of a punch without loss or, all this extra vegetal matter. So yeah, I think they are much more pungent. I agree with you completely. I think this experiment did show that, but hey, if you do this, send me a bottle. I would love to try it out.
Yeah. And maybe we'll get to it again in the future and keep weight, hop weight, constant. Thanks, Christopher. Anybody with two first names, you get. I was just having this conversation with a guy I work with. His name's Chris George. Two first names again, and the only other person I knew who had two first names name was Chris Frank. Go figure. All Chris's. So thanks for your comment. If you guys have one, you can drop your comments on any of our experiment articles on Reddit, Facebook, wherever it is, and we may end up getting it read out on a show. Well, all right, Brian, I guess that's a wrap. We are all out of time. Any parting words?
Don't leave me. You're going to make me cryo. I don't know. I was trying to think of a cryo pun the entire show, and that's the best I could come up with.
Yeah, it wasn't.
How sad is that?
Yeah, it wasn't that good, man. Well, don't forget to head over to brewlosophy.com to read about the experiment discussed in this episode, as well as everything else we're up to. The Brulosophy podcast is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors as well as all of our rad listeners. We seriously could not do this without you. Cheers to everyone who has subscribed and left a review of our show. It makes a huge difference. If you haven't yet, please consider doing so. Head over to brulosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can easily help us to continue producing this podcast. If you want a reward for your support, visit patreon.com/brulosophy. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Brulosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it suits my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more.